So what about those three magi we hear about around Christmas time? I was just reminded of them when I saw this traditional nativity scene just walking around downtown Chicago. It had Mary, Joseph, of course, the baby Jesus. It had shepherds. It had the three magi that we always see. And so people sometimes ask me about who these guys actually were. In this video, I want to break down the top 3 things that everybody should know about who the Magi actually are. Because a lot of people have that question. Who are the Magi? Well, first, the Magi were probably astrologers, not kings. And even though we hear the lyric, "We three kings of Orient are," around Christmas time, that famous song, the Gospel of Matthew actually never calls them kings. In fact, the major Bible translations just call them wise men. But these guys studied astrology, they studied magic, they studied how to interpret dreams. Now, fun facts, if you fast forward to other places in the Bible, you actually see a related idiom in Acts chapter 8, where Luke says that Simon the sorcerer had been practicing magic. But he actually believed the apostles' preaching about Jesus. So that was kind of interesting. But later on, you see the word for just one magi, the word magos. You see that in the gospel according to Luke. Luke's talking about a guy named Elymas or Elumus, aka Bar Jesus. Well, he was the sorcerer in Acts 13, and he was opposing what the apostles were saying about Jesus. But if you go way back in time to the Old Testament, in the Hebrew scriptures, you will also see wise men in the book of Daniel, when King Nebuchadnezzar was trying to get wise men to interpret his dream, if you remember that story. That's where we see wise men in the Bible outside of the Christmas story. Now, number 2, the wise men were from the Middle East, not Asia. So the lyric, "We three kings of Orient are," it also raises questions about where the Magi came from. And one idea is that they came from Babylon, where Iraq is today. Because the book of Daniel in the Old Testament actually talks about wise men, as we just mentioned. They were probably influenced by Zoroastrian religion. But they also could have been influenced by Jewish ideas from the prophet Daniel, because the prophet Daniel was actually there 600 years before Jesus. King Nebuchadnezzar promoted him. He promoted Daniel above all the wise men because he was the only one who could actually interpret the dreams of the king. If you remember that story from chapter 5 of the book of Daniel. So Jewish messianic expectation could have actually become a part of the Magi's tradition too. And so maybe that's why, even though they were Gentiles, even though these Magi weren't Jewish, they actually wanted to worship the king of the Jews, which is really quite a thing. But it's interesting to think about. It's very plausible historically. Now, finally, the Bible doesn't say that only 3 of them visited Jesus. The Gospel according to Matthew, it says that the Magi brought Jesus 3 kinds of gifts: gold, frankincense, which is a kind of incense, myrrh, which is a kind of perfume. Those are the 3 gifts. And so you've got 3 wise men in the traditional nativity scene that we all know and love to represent those 3 kinds of gifts. But there may have been more of them, especially if they were bringing the kind of tribute you would expect people to bring a king. Think about in the Hebrew scriptures when the Queen of Sheba came to visit King Solomon. She actually brought a whole caravan with camels and stuff, and she gave Solomon 9,000 pounds of gold. Sheba was big in the spice trade, and she gave him more spices than anyone had ever given to anyone else at that time. You can read about those details in 1 Kings 10:10 if you're interested in that. So the lyric, "We three kings of Orient are," doesn't give us the best picture of who the Magi were. But the Bible can help us figure out that they were probably a number of wise men from Babylon who came to visit Jesus with 3 kinds of gifts. And so when we see 3 Magi in the traditional nativity scene, I hope the story of these Gentiles actually inspires us to worship Jesus, the King of the Jews. But a question I get asked a lot more often around Christmas time is this: was the virgin birth copied from pagan myths? Click or tap the screen to see that vlog, or watch another video which I think you'll find helpful. I'm your apologetics guy, Mikkel, and until next time, keep the faith.